this is a story I wanted to share, and this kind of goes into that whole thing where it's like this is a systemic problem. So this guy is a professor at University of Florida, and check out this thread. This is let me put it back up so y'all see it. A long time ago, when I was younger and dumber, I did a police ride along with a high school classmate who had gone on to become a cop. It was one of the most chilling and radicalizing nights of my life. Two memories stand out to me. The first is how my classmates spent most of the night rolling around suburban Maryland in a patrol car, punching his license plate number into a database, looking for excuses to pull people over, serving and protecting. My classmate was so bored so right away, I mean, getting back to what we were just talking about earlier, why does this dude, not the dude writing this, but why does the person he's describing, why does that guy need a gun? First of all, we'll start there.
What job he had nothing to do.
He's bored. He's bored. So he devoted special attention to beat up cars or drivers who looked, quote, out of place, which typically meant black or brown drivers in predominantly white neighborhoods. So I can share this right now. So when I was like full-time on the road, I had a 98 Honda Accord that was pretty beat up. This car was about 270,000 miles in, had 5 drivers before me, had lived in a bunch of different states, had an engine that refused to die. His name was Eddie, because when I got that car, I looked at that car and I was like, you're an old blues musician named Eddie. But and me and Eddie had a good time. But Eddie had tinted windows, and most of the time Eddie was in a different state. So Eddie had out-of-state plates, usually where I was driving. And I'm not even embellishing. I would get pulled over on a regular basis, and they would, and it was literally, and I knew this, it was because the cops were bored. They saw tinted windows and an out-of-state license plate, and they decided we're going to see what's going on and make sure this is nothing to worry about. And then they would see my face and they would decide I was nothing to worry about. Why did they decide that? Because I'm white. That's why. That was it. I mean, I would have police officers just pull me over. They'd have this kind of look of fear about them until I rolled down my window. And then all of a sudden their demeanor would change and they would just be like, one guy was like, oh, you didn't do anything wrong. That was how he opened. He's like, you didn't do anything wrong. And I was like, yeah, I know that. That's why I'm wondering what's going on here. He's like,
It's like, yeah, how could you have been doing something wrong? You were just driving.
Yeah. And he just goes, I was just making sure you weren't too tired or something. It looked like you swerved a little bit back there. Oh, and wow. I was like, I did? And he goes, it might have just been the wind. And I almost was this close to being like, dude, can you just tell me that you're bored and you saw out-of-state plates and tinted windows and you just decided to pull me over and you saw that I was white and now you don't care? Just like, if you admitted that to me, at least I'd be like, well, at least you're telling the truth, because that's what's really going on here. That's what's really going on here. And so, yeah, I mean, getting back to this thread, it's like, that's totally believable that this is a guy who just goes around looking for people to pull over for whatever reason. And the story gets better. So my classmate was so bored. All right. So fortunately, few of those searches resulted in traffic stops. I seem to recall my classmate pulling over a guy for a broken taillight, but for the most part, he spent the night driving around aimlessly. To punctuate his boredom, my classmate will respond to other cops' traffic stops. Because whenever there's an incident, usually the best thing for it is more cops. That usually helps. Yeah. When he heard another cop had pulled someone over, he'd turn on his lights and tear off into the night. Most of the time, he'd arrive at the scene of the stop long after the incident had passed. One time, though, the traffic stop was ongoing. In this instance, a colleague of his had pulled over a car for some trivial reason, a broken taillight, expired registration, whatever, and discovered that the driver was, as I recall, an ex-convict driving with an expired license. The guy was white, had gotten out of prison earlier in the week, and hadn't had the chance to renew his license yet. When he got pulled over, he was driving around with his wife and his young kids. Not content to leave this poor guy with a warning, the officer who initiated the traffic stop asked him to step out of his car for a conversation. That usually goes great. As they were talking, more and more bored cops rolled up, including my classmate. Not surprising, the situation kept getting more intense. The guy who had been pulled over looked increasingly stressed as more cops materialized, and the cops responded to his stress with heightened levels of aggression. Eventually, the scene came to a boil. I don't know exactly what happened. I seem to recall the guy taking a swing at a cop or raising his voice. Regardless, he wound up face down on the curb, his hands cuffed behind his back. His family looked on, screaming and crying as the cops hauled him away. It had been a short family reunion. As we drove away, my classmate told me that because this guy had violated his parole, he would likely do a multi-year stint in prison. And that was the night. A full shift devoted to manufacturing crime, desperately searching for reasons to pull people over and then harassing people until they snapped. And this is the last thing I'll read. And I think this guy makes a good point. My classmate wasn't an exception to his department's rule. He wasn't a quote unquote bad apple. As he told it, he was doing exactly what his department expected him to do. He saw himself, in fact, had been trained to see himself as a dog protecting sheep from wolves. But from inside his car, the sheep receded from view, and all the flesh and blood people in his community, and especially the people of color, took on a decidedly wolf-like aspect. He clearly viewed them as enemies and interacted with them as such. In short, nothing he did made anyone safer. Wow. Serve and protect.
Yeah. So you see, even the cops know how useless they are, so they have to manufacture shit. You know?
It's like that just dispels all doubt. It's like this guy, he's just driving around looking to cause trouble. Those are, I mean, that's not law enforcement.
It's like a home.
It's like what?
It's like a home monitor with power and a gun, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, and even worse, it's just like, it's like these are the kids who didn't have enough to do in high school. Like let's drive around looking for trouble.
Yeah.
So I mean, did that surprise you guys at all though? Like in a way, it's like these firsthand accounts are so valuable because it really just forces you to just look something in the face. But then it's like none of this isn't stuff we didn't already know.
No, they're very bored. I remember when I once when I first moved here, I had out-of-state plates on my car, and I was I was driving to church. That's the funniest part, on a Sunday morning with a friend, and we got pulled over. And I think it was something to do with my car. I think like the blinker wasn't working or something. I'm not sure. But I also had an out-of-state license plate. And this police officer pulled us over. We pulled over, and I said, "Thank you so much. I was expecting a warning." And then it was before when those GPS, we used to stick them on the windshield, remember?
Oh, yeah.
So then he started saying he was going to write me up for the GPS that didn't follow some code, which I'd never heard of before. And then, and I had sunglasses on, and he kept accusing us of going home after a party.
And wait, you said, what time was it? Oh, so it was the next morning because you were going to church.
I was going to church on a Sunday morning. And I was like one of these really progressive hippie churches, so we weren't dressed in church clothes. We were just wearing regular clothes. So to him, it didn't look like we were. He kept saying, "You don't look like you're dressed to go to church." And I was like, "Yeah, well, we go to I told him we go to this really casual progressive church, so they don't care about clothes there." And he kept saying, "Oh, you look like you're going to a party." I was in my 20s still, so I was I used to dress up a lot more. So maybe to him, it didn't look like church clothes. Me and my friend. So then I made a mistake. Because he keeps "What, were you out drinking all night? Were you just sober enough to get home?" He was trying to say we were walk of shaming, and we're showered and makeup and everything, you know what I mean? And so I took my sunglasses off because I thought maybe if he sees that my eyes are not red or tired, he would understand, So I did that, and as soon as I did that, he was just like, "Oh," he starts hitting on me. He's like, "You have beautiful eyes." He starts hitting on me, then tells me he thinks I'm drunk, and he made me get out of the car and do a whole drug walk just so he could stare at me. It was so scary, and I'm not trying to elevate my problem to obviously what Black and Latino people face in America. I know it's nothing close to that. But he just made me stand there forever and just leered, creepy, stared at me the whole time. Then he told me to get into his car because he's going to take me to the police station. So I was like,
"What? What did you do?"
He said,
"Didn't do anything."
He insisted I was drunk.
Oh my God! And you passed everything.
And so then and then I was really afraid to be alone with him. But fortunately, I do know my rights to a degree, and I'm also not a targeted minority in this country. So I feel like if I was, I don't know if I'd be alive, But I started saying, "Hey, look, I need you to give me a breathalyzer. I know my right. If you're going to say I'm drunk, I require a breathalyzer." And then after that, and I started speaking up for myself a little. I think, because they also know, I don't know. So then he let me go. But that was like a really long time that he just had me standing out there staring at my ass, like basically out in the middle of nowhere. And I do think that when I spoke back, I think maybe if I'm not, I'm South Asian, I'm not from a targeted minority group. So I think if I was, I don't know how that would have ended. I think I got out of that without injury or alive because of my race, honestly. But because he was asking me that, he's like, "Oh, are you Indian? Like your eyes are so this and that," and I was just like, what, and then I was like, oh my God, this guy is so bored. He has nothing to do on a Sunday morning. So he's just sexually harassing women that he sees on the road. You know what I mean? And
That's
I
so
got back
disgusting.
to the and the friend of mine, who's also a person of color, was like, "Oh yeah, he was so nice to let you go." And I was like, how brainwashed are we? That was not nice. Like, would you have thought that if you were out there? I was like, just because he was using polite words, what he did was really gross, So, yeah, and that's when I was just like, oh, these guys are incredibly bored. Like, they have nothing to do, so they're just harassing people. And I think he was hoping that I would do something or say something that could justify him escalating it.
Or he was hoping that his theories based on absolutely nothing were correct, and you guys were coming back from a party, or something like that, and you weren't sober or whatever. I mean, it's so unbelievable. I mean, I've seen like guides out there where they're like, well, this is how you talk to cops if you, ever have an altercation. And it's like, you have to be so careful with your words because the smallest thing might have them fly off the handle. And it's like, why do we tolerate this? I mean,
the job.
Yeah. I mean,
can I just say, like, hearing you guys' experience with the police, I'm like, wow, that's not that bad.
I mean, I know that's the thing. I know it, man. I mean, I've had, for instances where cops have, they've wanted to search my car, and they always say, use the words, "I'd prefer you didn't," because it is your right that unless they have probable cause, they can't search your car. But don't say, "You can't search my car. That's my right." They're like, don't say that. Say, "I'd prefer you didn't. I don't feel comfortable with that." That's what I did. And the cop kept trying, like, "Let me in your car." And I'd be like, "I'd prefer you didn't. I don't feel comfortable." And eventually he gave up on it. But, he probably would have found some lame, like, "This is probable cause," if I was black.
Yeah. I mean, I've been, I've had my experiences with the cops, and I've had, guns pulled on me, and, I've been.
Whoa, you gotta tell us a story now. You can't just leave that alone.
Well, I mean, the probably like the biggest one was, I was driving, and just all of a sudden I got boxed in by all these cops, and they all came out with guns pointed at me, and there was, a helicopter, and, it was like this big crowd of cops that just surrounded me, and I had to get out of the car, get face down on the ground, and I was cuffed, and this whole thing. And then they said that, well, your car's in our database reported as stolen, and then which it wasn't. Obviously, I had all my papers and everything, and they let me go, but. The whole thing is, like, every instance I've had where I've gotten pulled over or I've had cops approach me with their guns drawn, it was never for something that was necessary to have your guns out. Like, even if I did steal a car, you don't need 20 cops with shotguns because somebody stole a car. You know what I mean? Like, it's completely unnecessary, or I've had instances where, I was just, standing on the street, and then all of a sudden, these cops come and with their guns drawn, and they say, "Oh, we heard there was a gang fight, or we heard you fit the description of this suspect or whatever." And it's like, I'm just standing here, you know what I mean? You don't need, it's always, they always escalate the situations, you know what I mean? And one thing I want people to understand is, because a lot of people say, like, well, why don't you just comply? And why don't you just, do what they say? And what a lot of people don't understand who haven't been in that situation is, like, when you have, like, a bunch of cops running up on you with guns drawn and you haven't done anything, it's hard to process, it's hard to process in that moment, because you're like, what? I didn't do anything wrong. And they're all yelling, "Oh, get your hands up!" Like, it's hard to process, what the right thing to do is. What happens is you get scared. And when you're scared, you want to run, or you want to say, "No, I didn't do anything wrong." You know what I mean? because that's what happened to me. Because I was like, no, I didn't do anything wrong, and they were coming to my car with guns, and I was like, there's nothing in there. You know what I mean? But I could honestly, like, maybe I could have gotten shot for that, and they would have been like, well, he resisted. So so that's one thing I really want people to understand, that it's hard. It's hard to process when you're in that situation.
And it's just, the systemic racism in law enforcement, which can be traced back to generations. And it's like, after Ferguson happened, Anonymous revealed to us that there are just open KKK members, literally open KKK members, given badges and guns. And you've seen more of that circulating on Facebook. They're showing, or not, Twitter mostly, but they're circulating these photos of these registered cops. They get their descriptions. They're like, this is who this is. They have a white power tattoo. I mean, they're attracted to the job so they can brutalize minorities. That's what they want to do. That's their sole purpose. And they're getting through, and nothing's being done. And people are still hesitant to say that this is a systemic disease that needs to just be gutted and restart. Full stop. We're starting over. You can reform that. You can't reform that.
Yeah, it's too deep.
Yeah. And also, I want to say, because, that story that you recounted was, the victim was a white man. And I want people to understand, because people want to say, like, well, white people get pulled over and white people get killed by the police too. And yes, they do. But I want people to understand that, like, for this system to continue, yes, some white people have to be sacrificed for the system to continue. And that's always been that way, because the system is mainly designed to oppress Black people and people of color. And if some white people get caught up in that, well, so be it, because we need this system to continue. So if some poor white people, have to die, well, that's fine,
Yeah.
Get your news on with Ron. Don't you wanna know what's going on? We're getting our news on today. Get your news on with Ron. Don't you wanna know what's going on? We're getting our news on today. You can tweet me an article at Ron Placone. We'll go through it together and make it our own. Get your news on with Ron. Don't you wanna know what's going on? We're getting our news on today.